Chronicle presents the order of this story in a very weird way, but I'm just doing it the way the book says, alright? Don't yell at me. Horde champions, alongside Nathanos Blightcaller and Lillian Voss, established a foothold in Tyrigard Sound. There, they exploded the Kultiran captain, Amalia Stone, and then raised her as a Forsaken. Next, they made their way to a cemetery in Drustvar in search of a legendary captain from the Second War, Marshal M. Valentine, captain of the Pride of Tyrigard. But, upon searching his crypt, they discovered that his body was not there. At which point, Amalia Stone finally found her voice and revealed that his corpse was actually still at the bottom of the Great Sea. In order to find his body, we were going to need a Tide Sage. So, we found a Tide Sage in Stormsong Valley. A dying Kultiran called Thomas Selling. Due to his illness, this guy really wanted to be a Forsaken, because he was under the misguided impression that his family would still love him afterwards. Spoilers, they did not. They hated him now. And side note, I'm starting to think these Chronicle books hate Rexxar, because they've snubbed him at literally every opportunity to even mention his name. But, with Thomas Selling's assistance, champions were able to reach the depths of the Great Sea, finding an entire graveyard of wrecked ships, all sunk back when the Red Dragons set upon the Kultiran Third Fleet during the Second War. We then returned to the surface with two bodies, one being the captain, M. Valentine, and the other, Derek, the eldest son of the Proudmoore family. Anyway, Thomas Selling then decided to inform the Horde of a very special relic, one which could command both storm and sea, the Abyssal Scepter. 'Twas the pride of the Tide Sages, kept under lock and key at the Stormsong Monastery. And that sounded pretty bloody useful, so we hatched a plan. Nathanos strung Derek's body up in Tyrigard Sound in order to provoke a strong emotional reaction from his mother, Lady Catherine Proudmoore. And that worked. She sent every available soldier to the Horde's location, whilst Zelling and the champion used a portal to sneak into the monastery and steal the scepter. And then, we all buggered off, with both Derek's body, because heaven forbid we leave that behind, and the powerful relic. This would not be the last time Sylvanas would use Derek against his family, but for now, the Banshee Queen had other plans. And believe it or not, now is the point where the Stormwind extraction scenario takes place, apparently. Talanji, the Princess of Zandalar, and Prophet Zul had been sailing to Orgrimmar to discuss a partnership with the Horde. Zandalar was struggling. However, the Zandalari princess's ship was captured by the Alliance, and they were taken to Stormwind Stockade, where they were being held for conspiring with the Horde, which is precisely what they were on their way to do, to be fair. Now, sensing an opportunity for the Horde to gain a fleet of their own, Sylvanas assembled a covert team of operatives. Nathanos Blightcaller, the Darkspear chieftain Rokan, the first Arcanist Thalyssera, and the Horde's greatest champion, Bumferfumph, head out to Stormwind City to rescue the princess. The Horde strike team managed to infiltrate the city and the stockade undetected, a little bit shocked to discover a dispirited but still alive Varrock Starfang. A lot of bit shocked when the former High Overlord outright refused their offer of escape. He would never again lend his strength to Sylvanas' twisted vision of the Horde. But no ill feelings, take care of yourselves, bye! Rokan and company then found Talanji and Zul, but upon releasing them, everything went to poop. An Alliance trap. The stockade immediately went into lockdown, with the group's magic nullified. But, with the assistance of Zul, who is a prophet and can therefore see things before they've happened, they managed to escape. They then crept their way through the city, cloaked by Rokan's shadow magic, narrowly avoiding open conflict with many prominent Alliance leaders. But Jaina Proudmoore saw right through their trickery. She relentlessly pursued them, cutting off their path with a wall of ice. And for a brief moment, everything seemed lost. But Talanji saved the day, calling upon her patron, Rezan, the Lower of Kings, and that big old beastie boy sheltered the group long enough for them to shatter the ice wall, blocking their path. Also, Zul set a bunch of buildings on fire, which also helped. They then reached the safety of their ship and cheesed it, setting sail for the Zandalari capital, Atal'dazar. Nathanos was a bit annoyed, because that wasn't the plan, but Talanji informed us that this was her ship, and therefore that's where we're going. Unfortunately, the Alliance hadn't just given up the chase. A bunch of their ships caught up with us, and opened fire. But Talanji once again requested aid from Rezan, and the Lower of Kings obliged, significantly increasing the speed of our ship. The fog on the horizon then parted, revealing that we were actually very close to the shores of Zandalar, and the Golden Fleet then immediately fired on the pursuing Alliance ships, utterly destroying all but one of them, which managed to escape to tell the tale. Now, a brief little primer on the trouble in Zandalar, and then we'll jump into all of the Horde zones. The ancient empire of the Zandalari was beset by enemies from without and within. Blood trolls, in Nazmir, were playing silly buggers. Meanwhile, the Zanchuli Council were acting as if that wasn't a big deal. They weren't particularly fond of the Horde's arrival, either, advising the king that we should be removed, post-haste. However, rescuing the princess had at least brought us some favour. Rastakhan appointed the champion the Speaker of the Horde, also allowing the Horde to establish an embassy inside the pyramid of Dazar'alor. And thus, the levelling storyline for the Horde begins. First up, Nazmir. Thousands of years ago, the Titans were doing a bit of research, trying to figure out a way to destroy the old gods. But during their experiments, they kinda accidentally created an old god instead, which is literally the opposite. They then sealed the creature away in their quarantine facility Uldir, but in the time between then and now, the creature, named Gahun, managed to fool the trolls living above its prison. Those that fell for Gahun's trickery thought that they were worshipping a lower, and started to call themselves blood trolls, dedicating themselves to pleasing and freeing their blood god. Anyway, Talanji volunteered to lead an expedition into the swamps in order to investigate these blood trolls, taking us and Rokan with her as well. As far as the princess was concerned, the blood trolls were the greatest threat to Zandalar, so she wanted them dealt with. Upon arrival, we discovered a fallen encampment. Every Zandalari soldier that had been stationed there was dead. Rokan and his Darkspear scouted ahead to set up a new camp, whilst Talanji and the champion stayed behind to burn the bodies with special fire, blessed by Bwonsamdi, the Lower of Death. Next, we wandered into Bloodfire Ravine, at which point Talanji's eyebrows raised all the way up to the top of her face. An entire complex city had been built, Zul Nazman. The princess and champion then witnessed the leader of the blood trolls, one Grand Mada Atina, and worse than that, we also saw a Titan construct being fed blood magic. Now Talanji wanted to attack immediately, but 'twas folly to challenge the blood matriarch at the seat of her power, so we cheesed it instead. But arriving back at camp, Talanji was furious. Her father had long dismissed the threat that was the blood trolls, and now it was up to us to stop them. However, the blood troll forces were many, and our forces were not many. So, Talanji came up with a plan. She held a close connection to the Lower. They'd probably help. After a bit of scrying, we discovered the location of 4 Lower in Nazmir: the wise turtle Torga, the strong frog Kragwar, the cunning bat Hyreek, and finally, Bwonsamdi. The Lower of Death's temple was nearest, so we head there first, and Bwonsamdi pretty much immediately agreed to help. Turns out he was well aware of the blood trolls, because many of them used to be his followers. He agreed to assist, but on one condition. The souls of the blood trolls would be returned to their former patron when all was said and done. So that was one Lower down. However, the other 3 weren't going to be quite so quick and easy. The blood trolls did control most of the region after all. Infiltrating their ranks to gather intelligence seemed like the best course of action, so we did that. Behind enemy lines, we then discovered that Hyreek had actually become corrupted. The Bat Lower now served the blood god. So, with a heavy heart, we took its ass in order to prevent Hyreek from empowering Gahun. After that, we accompanied some Tortolan, long-lived amphibious creatures that were making their pilgrimage to Torga's Rest. Unfortunately, upon arrival at that place, we found nothing but Torga's remains. The Turtle Lower had been slaughtered by the blood trolls. Things were not completely lost though. We did have the Lower of Death on our side now. With Bwonsamdi's aid, the Speaker of the Horde communed with Torga's spirit, who then revealed that the blood trolls were still around, using his body to summon Jungo, the Herald of Gahun. So, we ran around for a bit, felling blood trolls and Jungo, and then assisted the Tortolan in performing a final rite to put Torga's spirit to rest. And somehow ended up reincarnating the bugger instead, so that worked out better than expected. As thanks, the Tortolan escorted Talanji and her expedition to Gloom Hollow, the home of the final Lower, Kragwar. Thankfully, Kragwar fared better than the previous 2 Lower of this zone, but his followers had not. Blood trolls were slaughtering all who worshipped the Frog Lower, which had weakened Kragwar quite significantly. So we restored his totems and gave him some presents, which ultimately boosted his power back up a bit, and Kragwar granted us his boon in return. So after all of that, Talanji's expedition was now slightly less crap. However, Rokan had also requested additional Horde assistance, which just now arrived in the form of the Goblin strike force, the Gob Squad, bringing with them some advanced weaponry. Another unexpected resource came from a deactivated Titan Keeper, Hezrel, who informed us of G'huun's true origins, as well as the fact that 2 of the 3 seals keeping it imprisoned were broken. The one here in Nazmir, and the one in Vol'dun as well. Only one remained, in Atal'dazar. At this point, slightly boosted by some lower, some advanced weaponry, and a handful of goblins, we then returned to Zul Nazman and confronted Grand Mada Atina, punching her in the boobs. Hezrel then directed us to the ruins below the city, the Altar of Rot, and we did the Underrot dungeon, defeating G'huun's Rot in its purest form, known as the Unbound Abomination. And that's it for Nazmir. Next, Vol'dun. General Jackrazet of the Zanchuli Council was a Sand Fury troll. He had actually accompanied Prophet Zul to Pandaria, earning renown as a master of martial strategy. But he was an asshole, and one of his favourite things to do was exile anyone that questioned him to die in the deserts of Vol'dun. Long ago, Vol'dun had been a lush jungle where a bunch of trolls lived, as well as a snake people called the Sethrak, worshipping the lower Sethralis, and everything was lovely. However, during the Empire of Zul and the awakening of the Akia roughly 16,000 years ago, Sethralis sacrificed herself to slay Mithrax, the Unraveler. Unfortunately, the Cathraxi general was still able to destroy the second seal of G'huun's prison before it died. The Sethrak, fearing that Mithrax would one day return and finish the job, decided to seal its remains away inside the pyramid of Atulaman, with 3 of the most powerful Sethrak, Vorik, Korthek and Solthis, each taking a keystone. After that, a glorious temple for Sethralis was built, with the Sethrak hoping maybe she would be reborn one day. Unfortunately, in the absence of Sethralis, the lush jungles of Vol'dun withered to endless sands. Some of the Sethrak continued to hope and pray, calling themselves the Devoted, whilst other snake people kinda lost patience and became faithless, with Korthek leading that disillusioned bunch, proclaiming himself emperor. Korthek then got real greedy, desiring dominance over the entirety of Zandalar, and since they'd completely lost faith in their dead lower, he decided the quickest way to achieve that was to free the very enemy Sethralis had died fighting. So, unbeknownst to everyone, he and General Jackrazet were in cahoots, intent on freeing Mithrax, and in turn, G'huun. But anyway, Talanji dispatched the Horde champion to gather some evidence against the general, during which we teamed up with Blade Master Kaja, who was also seeking info. Her friend, Rakira, was missing, probably exiled by Jackrazet after asking too many questions. However, our reconnaissance mission to Vol'dun didn't go as planned. We were captured immediately by faithless Sethrak, only to then immediately be assisted by furry nomads, the Vol'pira, a fox-like race also of the region, who had long been slaves to the bad Sethrak. Venturing further into the zone, we came upon the Temple of Akunda, the lower of storms and new beginnings, and found Kaja's missing friend, Rakira. But both Rakira and Akunda seemed to be under some sort of spell or something. So we solved that problem. Rakira then revealed that Jackrazet had deployed a bunch of Zandalari soldiers, without the king's knowledge or approval, and they were searching the desert for some kind of weapon, something which could utterly destroy the capital. We then made a brief stop at the ruined city of Zul Ajin, where we uncovered a secret hidden message from Keeper Solthis. Unfortunately, he had already fallen to Korthek, but, lucky for us, his keystone had been safely hidden away, right here, so we now had one of those. Our search then took us to yet another temple, this one belonging to the Devoted, the good Sethrak, at which point we met Keeper Vorik. He informed us of all of the history and stuff, and that his keystone was here, in this temple. Safely guarded, totally fine. But the Devoted leader wished for us, Bumfafumph, to join him on a mission of vengeance for Solthis, leaving both totally safe, definitely not going to be taking keystones, behind. And we thought that was the best idea we've ever heard. Now, infiltrating Korthek's fortress was not really a two-man job, but, lucky for us, the Vol'pira offered to assist if we freed their kin from slavery, which was a win-win for us, because freeing them would deprive the faithless of an asset, and having a bunch of armed furry nomads running around would serve as a pretty good distraction as well. And with that, we descended into the Crater of Conquerors, liberating Vol'pira, arming them, and creating utter chaos. allowing the champion and Vorik to press forward into Korthek's fortress itself, where we punched him in the boobs. Unfortunately, Korthek's last words revealed a devastating truth that no one could have predicted. General Jack Rosette had gone to the Sanctuary of the Devoted and we rushed back to confirm that. The keystones were indeed gone, with most of the devoted of the temple slaughtered. However, both Kaja and Rakira were not among the fallen. With all 3 keystones, there was really only one place that Jack Rosette would be going though, Atal'dazar. Vorik conveniently knew of a secret entrance to the pyramid, accessed via the crypts below, so we went ahead and made our way through those, finding Kaja and Rakira in the process. And eventually, we found the general, who was nearing the end of his blood ritual to raise Mithrax. All he needed was one final sacrifice, which he decided we would be suitable for. However, upon taking his ass, Jack Rosette then leapt to his own death, becoming the final sacrifice himself instead. The horrific Cathraxi general then emerged, and we cheesed it, because that is a raid boss. Whilst fleeing, Vorik bade us to follow him to one final temple, the Temple of Sethralis dungeon. He had a theory that something was in fact preventing his beloved Loa from returning. And he was right. Inside the temple we found a group of Zandalari attempting to corrupt Sethralis into a dark Loa. I tried to deal with that, but I'm not a healer, so this was a bloody waste of my time. And that's that zone done. Next, Atal'dazar and the treachery of Zul. Our return with bad news and grave tidings only served to fracture the council even further. They all started squabbling with each other. At which point King Rastakhan asked if we could maybe just go about the rest of the city and help out. The first order of business, deal with one of Zul's renegade pupils, Vol'dun, who was holed up with his followers, yelling prophecies and being disruptive. However, upon reaching Vol'dun, we were surprised to see that he wasn't doing any blood magic, wasn't corrupted by the void or anything like that. He was simply yelling something about the crown of Zandalar being betrayed. The Empire was doomed. He and his followers were just a bunch of harmless survivalists. Being weird isn't a crime, but Prophet Zul ordered us to destroy Vol'dun. Such fanatical preaching could not be allowed, so we went ahead and did what we were told. Next, Yasma, the spy mistress of the crown, informed us that blood magic was being practiced at the sacred temple of Zanchul, so we rooted out that corruption. At the apex of the temple, we encountered blood magic cultists attempting to resurrect a dire troll, and after dealing with that, we met some more Loa. Gonk, Master of Shapes, and Paku, the Wind Mother. We picked one of them as our patron, obviously Gonk, and that's the end of that questline. Zul then directed us to the harbour, where we saw the consequences of Jack Rosette not doing his bloody job. Talanji had recently opened the port to all races to peddle their wares, but thanks to the lack of any sort of guard patrol, these merchants were not being protected at all. With aid from Zelani, the Blade of the King, we managed to bring a little bit of peace to the port, but not before uncovering the presence of even more blood magic and cultists. How had Spy Mistress Yasma missed this? And how had Prophet Zul not foreseen all of these things? Too suspicious to ignore. Zelani then prepared an urgent report for the king to inform him of this potential treachery, but just before we could deliver that, an urgent dispatch came in from Warport Rastari. The Mogu were attacking. The Speaker and Zelani travelled there immediately and discovered one of the top generals of the Thunder King, Warlord Kao, was leading this assault. So we murdered him and all of his friends. Unfortunately, this attack was merely a distraction. We returned to Rastakhan's throne just in time to witness absolute treachery, with Zul stabbing the king in the back. The Prophet then monologued about a vision he'd had of the Zandalari Empire rising again, one that this time would be fueled by blood. All would bow to Gahun. See, Zul had been planning this coup for years. 'Twas he that had leaked the locations of Zandalari troops to Grand Madaratina. He who had connected the faithless with General Jack Rosette. Zul then became infused with void energy, preparing to strike a killing blow against the already gravely wounded king. But the lower Paku then arrived, spiriting Rastakhan away. A short while later, loyalists and the Horde were able to heal Rastakhan's body, but his soul had already gone to Bonsandi. However, Razan, the lower of kings, then confronted Bonsandi, using a little bit of bargaining, and so the lower of death agreed to release Rastakhan's soul. Zul then dispatched followers to Razan's temple in order to drain the Great Lower's power, but we stopped that. Traps were set at the garden of the Lower, intent on consuming Gonk, Paku and the spider lower Shadra, and we kinda stopped that. Gonk and Paku made it out okay, but unfortunately, we were too late to prevent Yasma from consuming her patron, Shadra, and then buggering off. At the Temple of the Prophet, we learned the full extent of Zul's plan. From the Drakari of Northrend, he'd learned how to drain lower of their power. From the Thunder King in Pandaria, Zul had learned how to awaken long-dead kings. 'Twas his plan to go to King's Rest at some point and awaken the first ruler of their empire, Dazar. So, we made our way to the ancient city of atal'dazar, encountering both Zul and Yasma, but we were unable to stop the Prophet from ensnaring Razan in a blood magic ritual, destroying the lower of kings and then raising it as an undead horror. Inside the dungeon, we were forced to fight against that undead horror, but on the plus side, after defeating our former pal, we got to exact our revenge on Yasma, which made us feel slightly better. At this point, Rastakhan bade us to continue onward to the King's Rest dungeon, so we buggered off to do that, whilst he secretly bonded his entire bloodline to the Lower of Death. See, without the Lower of Kings, the king had lost most of his strength, and he was desperate for a new patron that would be powerful enough to defeat his many enemies, deciding one Samdi was the right guy for that job. Didn't ask his daughter if that was okay though, so bit of a dick move on his part. Anyway, inside the King's Rest dungeon, we faced a now risen great King Dazar, and took his ass. Unfortunately, Zul was not inside the dungeon, because he'd already set his sights on a much bigger prize. And that brings us to the final part of this video, in defense of Zandalar. The voice of Ga'Hoon called out to shatter the final seal of its prison, causing a massive invasion force to assault the Blood Gate from Nazmir. The champion arrived, bumfafumf, mounting a Devil Saw to crush hundreds of the invaders, assisted by Kragwa and Paku, but a second massive invasion force from Vol'dun then emerged, attacking the western borders of the zone. Rastakhan and Kragwa remained at the Blood Gate, whilst Talanji, Paku and the champion head west, arriving to find Rakira and Kaja somewhat holding the line. The champion rallied every civilian that could hold a spear to join the defence effort, as well as yet another lower, Kimball the Tiger. And with all of their assistance, we managed to push the invasion back to the bridge of dazar'alor. Unfortunately, Mithrax then emerged from Vol'dun and joined the fray. Gonk and Talanji surged forward to try and hold that thing back, urging the champion to reunite with the king, find and stop Zul, end this. Now Rastakhan was like 10 yards away, so we walked over to him, with Bwonsamdi raising an army of spirit warriors to join us as we fought our way up the pyramid. Unfortunately, whilst we were doing that, Zul empowered Mithrax even further, with the Cathraxi growing to monstrous proportions and making its way unimpeded towards the final seal. Rastakhan then cried out to Bwonsamdi, demanding the lower grant him its full power, which the Lower of Death happily obliged, allowing the king to "This is Sparta" Prophet Zul off the side of the pyramid, into a fiery inferno below. But Mithrax then went ahead and shattered the final seal on Ga'Hoon's prison anyway. Oh dear.